Hey there, Sagittarius. My name's Isaac. Welcome to my channel. We're going to do your reading for the month of September for 2024. Um, I've been putting this kind of disclaimer at the beginning of all my videos. I typically don't do love readings. I don't do the twin flame soulmate thing. I'm just kind of really tired of that whole phenomenon, that whole thing. So if you want that stuff, there's plenty of other channels that are already doing it. But if you want something a little deeper that has to do with spiritual evolution, your psychological evolution, progress, that kind of stuff, then stick around and you might just enjoy something. So let's do one more shuffle. Feels like it needs one more. All right. Okay, so the first card here we have is Temperance on the surface. Justice. People are always afraid of like the tarot or the Tower card and the Death card, but Justice, that's the one that's the sharp sword that you got to watch out for sometimes. Um, the Emperor, almost said Empress. I've been doing a lot of readings today, so forgive me if I'm a little tongue-tied. The High Priestess, Queen of Swords, the Star, and the advice is Seven of Cups and Two of Swords. So let's get into it. Look at this for just a second. So you're going through something kind of rough, I think, on some level here. This could be any kind of situation, but the on the surface here we have Temperance and Justice. So there's some kind of harsh lesson you're going through right now that's requiring you to really put a lot of work in, probably emotionally more so than anything else. This could be a material situation. This could be a job or a relationship or something like that where you're having to put in the work. Um, but justice is the merciless sword that comes along and cuts away anything that doesn't need to be in your life or that shouldn't be in your life. It is the universe coming through, and it's not just doing it just for the sake of making you miserable. It's for a good reason. It's the sword that cuts away excess growth, or if you think of like trimming your plants and stuff like that, you got to cut the dead leaves in order to allow for new growth to come in. And for the plants, it probably doesn't hurt them so much, but for us, it can be pretty uncomfortable because the things that it tends to cut away are the things that we are uh, egoically attached to, these things that we tend to identify with that are not actually who we are. They're just part of our conditioning from childhood, from the culture around us, from schools, from parents, all that kind of stuff. So more often than not, when justice comes in, what it's really cutting away is a belief, is a negative belief that doesn't need to be there because it's holding you back and making you unhappy. But we get so attached to these beliefs because we identify with them. The ego, the sense of identity, the mental self-image that we have. It's a combination of all the different beliefs that have like these emotional charges to them. And if you have any trauma in your background, then you have some trauma induced beliefs. The word belief, trauma, karma, sin, these are all the same thing. All four of those words mean the exact same thing. And they tend to manifest in our lives over and over and over again. So the primary mechanism of manifestation in your life is your beliefs. And if you can learn to clear out all of these conditioned beliefs and just be purely present, just identify as pure consciousness, which is a long process, but if you can do that, that's when you can kind of really start to gain some, I don't want to say control because it's not control. It's still not you. It's still just the universe doing things, but like you can kind of manifest things much more effectively when you've gone through this process. And so temperance is the work involved in that. So you've been put in some kind of harsh situation where you're really having to put in the work emotionally. And that's what's happening on the surface. But underneath the surface, we have the Emperor and the High Priestess. So it's kind of what I was just talking about, this idea that of like manifestation, this the bringing things into your life. The Emperor here, look how relaxed he is and look at what he's holding. So he's got this staff with the Ankh, the Egyptian Ankh, which represents the essence of life. It is the life force itself in perfect balance. So this is an enlightened being who has mastered the divine forces, the divine laws, the essence of life. He knows how to direct the wheel of life itself So instead of trying to make certain stuff happen, he knows how to interact with the higher forces, the intelligence behind all these, like the what the planets in astrology represent. Those planets represent cosmic forces, intelligent forces of creation, of nature. And when you learn how to sort of work with those things and direct them, uh, you can, look, like I said, he's relaxed. He knows he won. He knows he's going to win. He doesn't need to be angry or forceful at all, because why? He doesn't need to. He doesn't. It's completely unnecessary, because if something needs to be done, he can interact with the cosmic forces in whatever way you may do that, whether it's just through visualizations or through magic rituals or through just intentions or whatever. Um, and he uses these things not just to control people, or not to control people at all, to heal the world. We have this globe in his other hand that he's looking at with the cross sort of coming out of it. It's like enveloping it. It's like the idea of like the healing of the earth. The cross represents awakening through suffering, basically. That's really, if you really look at the story of Jesus and the cross, that's really what it represents. I think the story of Jesus is really a symbolic representation of the essence of the sun and what it does when it interacts with your life. And the thing that gets crucified is the ego, and it's painful. And you're in that right now. There's some aspect of the ego that is being crucified. Think about the image of him being on the cross with the crown of thorns. Well, that represents painful thoughts. It's that you're in a situation that it hurts to think about. His hands being bound or nailed. He can't do anything. You can't do anything about it. So there's a situation you're in. You can't control it. Thinking about it hurts. Your feet are bound, so you can't run away from it. And one of the things about the crucifixion that made it so brutal is that they would place your legs and hands in a place so that you can't rest, so that there's nowhere for your weight to rest. So you're constantly like putting pressure on things in your body. So it's like it's just painful. You can't fix it. You can't run away from it. You can't think about it. There's just nothing to do but just sit there and deal with the suffering. But that suffering is purifying, because the thing that turns it into suffering is not the situation itself. It's the attachment to the outcome. It's your attachment to it. It's the idea that it's your identification with the thing that is being cut away by this justice card here. So I know that's like brutal imagery, but really that's what this spiritual journey is all about. It's not all yoga classes and incense and tinkly music and meditation. That stuff's good. It has its place in time, but it's not the whole thing. The real process is dirty work. It's brutal. It's painful. That's, when the Buddha said life is suffering, really it's more accurate to say that there is suffering. And that suffering only happens because of our attachments, our egocentric attachments to certain things, to our belief systems. And when those are challenged, it's painful, it hurts. And sometimes these things are so deeply ingrained that we kind of have trouble getting over them or even recognizing them by ourselves. So there needs to be these higher powers that come into your life. So whatever, maybe you participated in some kind of ritual at some point or ceremony or something like that called a spiritual force into your life. And you may not have thought too much of it at the time. It might have felt cool and been an interesting experience, or maybe it was really profound, but you don't really see the effects of that until later. You don't see how massive these forces are, these spirits. You don't see how insanely powerful they are until later. And I think if you were involved in anything like that in the past, you're starting to recognize that, like, oh, this is no joke. This is real stuff. Something bigger than me, more powerful than me, has put me in a position that I can't get out of, and I can't fix it. All I can do is just sit with it and feel the feelings that come up as a result of this situation. But just by doing that, you're burning away the energy, the emotional energy that's kind of been repressed and trapped in your body through past traumas and through conditioning, through negative beliefs and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of get the sense that you're kind of going through it right now. It's kind of rough. Whatever the situation, whatever the actual manifested physical situation may be, this is the underlying essence of it. And with the high priestess here, it's ultimately driving you closer. It's improving your intuition. It's helping you be able to get into a more peaceful, sort of present state of mind where you can hear your intuition. Because when you go through these difficult, kind of painful processes, once it's over, you kind of look back on it and you're glad you went through it, even though it was unpleasant at the time, because it's brought you to a new state of being that is much more pleasant. It is cut away a certain a level of suffering from your life, a layer of suffering from your life that was being caused by something happening in your subconscious that maybe you weren't even aware of. Um, but it runs in the background and causes discomfort and suffering in life. Um, so even though this kind of brutal imagery of the cross I was talking about, even though it's painful and it does cause it's awakening through suffering, it's embracing the suffering because you kind of have no other choice right now. I think whatever the situation is what burns it away and lets it process, and it goes away forever, never to come back ever. Because that's what we're doing. This work that we're talking about here of processing these beliefs and overcome this doesn't just affect this lifetime. This is forever. Once you transcend all of these beliefs, you don't have to do this anymore. You won't even have to come back to this planet if you don't want to, because by that point, you'll identify as pure consciousness. You'll have developed the light body through doing this process. Then when the physical body dies, you're able to transfer, you've already transferred your identity away from the physical body. It's not that you're no longer identified with it. It's yours. You can use it. It's your, it's your meat puppet that you can use. But you start to recognize that that's not what you are, that even when the body dies, you're still consciousness. You can never actually die in that sense. You don't, if you exist, you're always going to exist for eternity, because how could you not? Existence has one quality. It exists. What exists cannot not exist. It's impossible. It doesn't work that way. So you're doing what in alchemy they call the great work. Um, and in the future here, we have the Queen of Swords. So I'm sorry, you may not be done. There's more difficulty to go through. There's more painful. The Queen of Swords is kind of like the Justice card in its mentality, in its attitude. It's like this is going to hurt, and it is what it is. And look, she's not like that's kind of a cold demeanor that this card has. But she's holding that butterfly transformation. Butterflies represent transformation, which is what you're going through, a transformation process. And she's wielding that sword, and she's kind of got this no nonsense kind of thing. So it's like the essence of the universe being like, this is going to hurt, but it's necessary. Um, but it actually, now that I actually look at this a little more, pulling up the star card here, it might actually be more so rather than something even more brutal stuff coming up. It could be that you start to recognize that this is a good thing. The star is kind of it's the awakening that comes once the tower's kind of fallen over. It's this um, it's the recognition of the divine force within you. And so you start to recognize that, okay, maybe even though this process that I've been going through kind of sucks, it's not fun, it's painful, but every time I go through one of these things, I actually am glad that I did it because I became more awake, more conscious. I became more aware of who and what I really am, and have let go of a layer of this unconscious programming that's causing nothing but problems in my life. So there's a recognition of it. It's like you start to embrace the pain. Um, and if you can learn to really do that, to where when these painful situations come up, and I'm not really talking about physical pain, really just this is more so psychological and emotional, which you ultimately have control over because it's all happening in your mind. You're kind of making it happen. It's just there's a voice going on in the back of your head that there's thoughts happening in the back of your head that you don't realize you're even thinking. They've become automatic because they've been there for so long that you forget they're even there. Um, so yeah, I feel like it's like you're starting to. What was I saying? If you can embrace that, if you can really see that as a positive thing, then when the next thing comes up that's where you find that you're in this kind of the force of justice shows up again, and you're like, oh no, things are going wrong again. You can have the presence of mind to be like, oh okay, so I don't actually, this isn't a bad thing. I don't have to. This doesn't have to be a horrible experience, because the more that you embrace what's happening, the faster the process is going to go, and the less the universe kind of has to force you into it. And it tends to be gentle at first when trying to teach you lessons, but then it turns up the volume, it turns up the intensity on whatever you're going through, slowly but surely, until you stop ignoring it. And so when you get into the point where you're like, kind of almost looking forward to the next challenge. Then the challenges start to become less and less. They're not as intense. They're not as painful, and you move through them faster because you're going with the process instead of fighting against it. And it's funny because Sagittarius really is the sign associated with like things like high magic, ceremonial high magic, which is a process of it's like a curriculum of ritual practices where you invoke all the elements, the planets, the zodiacal forces, and stuff like that. That facilitates this transformation process and speeds it up and intensifies it. Um, I digress. The advice here: the Seven of Cups and the Two of Swords. There may be a need to learn to be okay with not knowing. Be okay with not knowing what to do next, not knowing what's coming next, not knowing what you should be doing, because this is kind of like a blockage. There's kind of this, this Two of Swords has been coming up a lot in readings lately. It's kind of like cognitive dissonance. It's two ideas clashing against each other, and so there's this idea of the materialist point of view of control and ego. And then there's the more magical side of you of letting go, transcending, processing emotions, manifestation, that kind of stuff. And when these two ideas start to clash, it creates cognitive dissonance. It creates fog. It creates confusion. And you may flip flop back and forth. One day you feel very dedicated to your spiritual practice. The next day you're not so much, and you're questioning everything and wondering if you're crazy and if this is just all nonsense and if any of this magical spiritual stuff is even real. And you flip flop back and forward. And in those times when you fall subject to doubt and you start feeling the fear and questioning yourself and wondering if you're just crazy and this is all nonsense, you have to learn to be okay with not know with that confusion. Because the more you try to sort it out and figure it out and think about it, the more dust it kind of kicks up, and this always brings to mind the image of a cave diver, somebody who scuba dives and goes and explores underwater caves. If you kick up dust in those caves, it gets everywhere, and you can't see anything anymore. And if you panic and start freaking out trying to force your way out, you can get lost, and you kick up more dust. And people have died this way. And this is kind of a metaphor for this cognitive dissonance. So the more you think about it, the more you kick up that dust, the more confused you get. You have to be okay with feeling confused and not knowing what's coming next or what you need to do, or even if you're right about anything at all. And the more you can be okay with not knowing, the quicker that fog fades, and all of a sudden you start to feel like, oh, of course I know what I'm doing. I'm not crazy. I mean, why would I even entertain these ideas if they weren't rooted in my own experiences? So there's a bit of self-doubt, and that could be the overarching sort of thing that this justice card is forcing you to deal with, is doubt, self-doubt, and the inability to trust yourself and your ability to perceive the universe, the true nature of reality. Um, so anyways, I think I'm going to end this one here. I went on for a little while here and I think we pretty much covered it. So that's kind of it. If you want to get into a private reading, send me a message. All my information is down below. I have a series of other videos where I've done astrology readings for all 12 signs on my channel. Go check those out. Like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. And thanks for watching. Talk to you soon. Take care.